Hobart's Ultra106five, good morning. Well, this week is Brain Injury Awareness Week, and to join me to talk about that is Deborah Byrne. She's the Executive Officer of the Brain Injury Association of Tasmania. Good morning.
Good morning, Scott.
And you've got laryngitis at the moment. Your doctor said you can't talk.
That's right, except for important work events. So I've classified this an important work event.
Are you feeling okay? Is it just like in the throat or like...
Yeah, it's just I had laryngitis and I didn't give it time to recover. So what I find is the more I talk, the more I lose my voice. So you'll probably notice as the interview goes on, the croakier.
You'll get a bit croaky.
Yeah, the croakier I sound.
We won't keep you talking for too long, but it is an important week, isn't it? Tell us about Brain Injury Awareness Week.
So it's a national event held annually in the third week of August each year. And the aim of the week is to raise awareness around brain injury in the community, but also in raising that awareness is also hopefully to prevent brain injury to happening to anyone.
So of all the weeks, this is the week when you'd really like a strong voice, right?
Most definitely a strong voice, yes.
It's funny how that happens. So it's a significant week, and I know that you raise awareness all the time as part of the Brain Injury Association of Tasmania. So tell us about brain injury. Like, what is it?
So the definition of brain injury, it's any injury or damage to the brain that occurs after birth following a period of normal development. So what that means is a person has learnt, they've been born, they've learnt to walk, talk, read, write, they could be at their prime of their life, in a relationship, buying a house, and then have a brain injury, and there's multiple causes, so assaults, car crashes, stroke, degenerative neurological conditions, brain tumour, etc., all classed as a brain injury, and that brain injury significantly impacts their life. And if you look at a traumatic brain injury, for example, what it may mean is that person has lost that ability to be able to sort of walk or talk or read, write, eat, tie their shoelaces, go to the toilet independently, and then they have to learn to do all those things again. So it can mean months, even years of ongoing rehabilitation.
And I could imagine that there's a fair emotional side to that too, because, for someone that all of a sudden, say, 25 years old is in a car crash, gets a brain injury, but remembers all that they could do, that would be, like, I couldn't even imagine how hard that would be.
It is really challenging, and it's interesting if you look at the statistics around, say, for example, suicide following brain injury. So the suicide rate is 2 to 5 times higher following brain injury. The incidence of mental health or mental ill health is also higher following brain injury. And so, like you've said, is that one of the really difficult things around brain injury for a lot of people is you can remember what your life was like prior to your brain injury, and you know that you don't have that life anymore. So it's about, looking at a new identity, which can be really challenging for people. The other challenge, I guess, is that assumption that because a person has a brain injury, that they may have lost their intellect. And, perhaps if I can give you an example, one of the people that I worked with for a long time, he talks about, he could still tell you the periodic table. He could still go and talk to former colleagues around, paper recycling. But he may have difficulty remembering that he's done that, or be able to tell you, what he had for breakfast. Yeah. So that challenge around people assuming that the person has also lost their intellect. And so the community
treating you differently as well, and people that you could have a conversation with, all of a sudden they're talking to you like you're a child, like it must be so tough.
Yes.
I remember years ago I worked in the disability, and this person was born with cerebral palsy. Super smart, but I noticed even then the people around him treated him like he was a child and talked down to him, and kind of like talked like he was a 5-year-old. He was so smart, and his frustration came because people wouldn't recognise that, he could still communicate, he could still do all the things needed, but people perceived him a certain way. That's the issue, isn't it?
Very much so. And I guess particularly for brain injury, because many of the impacts of brain injury are not readily visible. So if a person has problems with their memory, being able to plan, to organise, in terms of their attention and concentration, the ability to regulate their behaviour. So assumptions can be made by people that don't understand brain injury, that, as you said, that the person is perhaps, more disabled than they really are.
Yeah. So how significant is this issue in our communities? Because it doesn't just affect the person that has the brain injury. It affects, families and a whole bunch of people, doesn't it?
It most definitely does. So we talk about the ripple effect of brain injury. So in terms of prevalence, in Tasmania the prevalence is about 2.2%, which is higher than the national average of 2%. So you're looking at potentially about 12,000 people that have reported activity limitations or participation restrictions as a result of brain injury. I guess the challenge is that there are probably a lot more brain injuries out in the community but people don't realise. So people that have perhaps had a concussion, for example. But then, as you said, you have that ripple effect. So it does affect families as well. But you also then, the effect sort of goes out further into the community. So, for example, people with brain injury are overrepresented in the statistics around criminal justice. So once again, very low percentage in the population, but potentially up to 42%.
Wow.
Of people with brain injury in the justice system. In youth justice, there's some research that indicates up to 65% of detainees in youth detention centres have brain injury, either diagnosed or undiagnosed. If you look at the intersection between brain injury and family violence, so brain injury is definitely a consequence of family violence, but it's also a contributing factor to family violence. If you think of some of the impacts of brain injury, that inability to be able to regulate your behaviour, for example, you could see how that could contribute to family violence. It's prevalent, in terms of, as we talked about, sort of that suicide rates. Homelessness, for example, isn't just about housing. Homelessness is very much about disability, and the prevalence of brain injury in your homeless statistics is also very high. Once again, that ability to be able to plan, to organise, to budget, regulate your behaviour, remember to pay your bills, etc. So you can see how it does impact right across the community.
So the Brain Injury Association of Tasmania is playing such an important part in raising awareness, but you do so much more than that. Tell us about your role and what you do.
So up until March 2020, the organisation was funded by the Tasmanian government, and we had a role about providing information and referral on brain injury to anyone in the community that wanted that. Systemic advocacy is very much a part of our role. We were funded as the statewide peak, and we also did professional development and that all-important community awareness. With the introduction of the NDIS, we lost that state government funding, and since then we've been reliant on Commonwealth grant funding. So whilst, there are a whole raft of issues with, short-term, time-limited one-off grant funding, it has provided the association with an opportunity to pilot some amazing projects. So one of those projects is the National Assistance Card, and the other one is the establishment of a service for people with cognitive impairment who are at risk of entering or exiting the justice service. So without our Just Day service, these people would have no services or supports in the community. I think what's really important to remember, if I can just highlight, the NDIS has been really great for a lot of people with disability, but for the NDIS, the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare estimate that 90% of Australians living with disability will not be eligible for an NDIS package. And where the NDIS falls over is that lack of supports for what they're calling that Tier 2. So people that have a disability that still need supports but aren't eligible for an NDIS package. So that's where the Just Day service particularly fills that gap.
And I know that you're in danger of, like if you lost your funding and the grants even, so that you're in danger of losing all your funding come next year, which would be so tragic because, if you think 45% in prison, it's so crucial. That to me seems so short-sighted that they'd even consider losing the Brain Injury Association of Tasmania. Can they not see that?
That's a good question, Scott. It is really frustrating. One of the things, the Brain Injury Association, we're celebrating our 25th anniversary.
Yeah, congratulations,
this year.
by the way. It's so good. I know you've been there for 22 of those or something.
20. Well, yeah, I'm in my 22nd year.
Yeah,
so
amazing.
Yeah, so we are the only specialist brain injury service in Tasmania, and we're that safety net service. So even though we're no longer funded to provide that information and referral, in the absence of anyone else that does that, we still do that. So the loss of the service to the community is really huge. So, yes, we lose our project funding next year. And once again, if you look at the National Assistance Card, which is an amazing initiative, I mean, this is something that little Tassie, has developed and has the potential to change the lives of all people with disability, across our nation. If we lose the funding for that to be able to continue, it is such a huge waste of money. I mean, we have a purpose-built online platform that we've invested in that allows people to apply for this card, and this card is the only really truly personalised card to support people with disability. I mean, there are other cards out there, but this is truly personalised. So the addition of a QR code which enables people to go in to list the areas where they have difficulty and how they want people to respond, and they can include that either in writing and or in video, and that card is that support for them to be able to communicate. To lose that to the community when it is doing so well, would be really tragic.
That's a game changer. That's a game changer.
Yeah.
Like, as you say, why would they even consider losing this? Like, how do people get behind this and say, hang on, this is not happening? Like, what can people do to support you in this?
Definitely go and lobby and talk to the Minister for Disability Services here, the lovely Honourable Joe Palmer. Joe launched Brain Injury Awareness Week for us yesterday, and I think she certainly understands the importance of the Brain Injury Association of Tasmania to all of Tasmanians, plus the work that we do. So lobby the Minister. She goes and meets with other ministers. She meets with Minister Shorten, the Minister for the NDIS. Get her to talk about just the importance of keeping some of these services in our community. The National Assistance Card, we've partnered with Autism Tasmania to make the card available. We're trialling it in Tasmania for the autistic community. And, Autism Tasmania have been absolutely, fantastic in being able to support us to do that. But they're in the same boat as we are. They lose their grant funding at the same time we do. Yeah. And so that's another loss to the community.
Yeah, well, I hope that you're around for many, many years. So this week, of course, it's Brain Injury Awareness Week. Deborah's the Executive Officer of the Brain Injury Association of Tasmania. Congratulations on 25 years. That's just an amazing achievement. 22 for you.
Thank you.
Almost.
Yes.
So to find out more, just go to www.biat, which is biat.org.au, or to find out more about the card too, nationalassistancecard.com. Is there anything else you'd like to say before I let you go?
.com.au.
.com.au, sorry.
So, no, just thank you for the opportunity. I'm really passionate about raising awareness of brain injury in our community. As I said, because of the hidden nature of many of the impacts, it is really, really poorly understood. People make assumptions. They might see someone that's walking with a bit of a gait or their speech is slurred. They make the assumption that they're drunk, and that's really, it's unkind, it's unfair. So please, I guess two key messages is, one, have that better understanding, but to understand also that brain injury is permanent. There is no cure for brain injury. So like most things where there's no cure, then prevention is the best option, because brain injury, as I said, it's permanent, it's lifelong, and it does not only impact the individual but families, and it has that ripple effect into our community.
Yeah, well, it'd be great to have you in again to have some updates, particularly on the funding and how it's going, because I think this is such an important service. And so well done. Congratulations on the National Assistance Card too. That's just crazy.
Thank you. We think it's, when you think little old Tassie, this amazing initiative, our goal for the card is that we would like to make this available to anyone in Australia living with disability, to be able to give them greater independence and confidence in the community, to support them to communicate, in particularly in situations where they may struggle or are unable to do so.
So biat.org.au. Hey, thanks, Deborah. Really appreciate you coming in.
Thanks, Scott. Appreciate it.